E te iwi tēnā katoa koutou, tēnā tātou katoa I roto I tēnei pō. Ko Che Wilson tēnei no Te Pai Pai Waho. Kia ora everybody, Che Wilson here from Te Pai Pai Waho, and really good to have you on tonight. And it's season 4 of Kauhau sessions and number 5 on Tangihanga. So, e mihi ana kia koutou o tira kia tātou katoa. I'm just going to open us up with a little karakia and then we'll get into things. Karanga kia rangino I atu I o nei, karanga kia papaya tako tuake nei. Te putunga o te kōrero, te putunga o te wānanga, ka puta ki wao, ki te waiao, ki te ao marama. Turuturo au I te waka maua kia tīna, ui e. Tāi ki e. Tāi ki e kia tātou I roto I tēnei pō. As I said, Che Wilson from Te Pai Pai Waho here. E mi'i atu ana, kia koutou, kia tātou katoa. E mi'i ana ki tō mātou rā wairua kāta I tonu nei ka oti, te rua te kaumāwaru o pēpuere tērā. Te rā I meinga tia e tūnga wairua, kia eke kirunga I te tikaraina, rīpene tā ki tōna otinga, no reire mi'i atu ana, mō ona maanatanga o mai tanga katoa. Kei te okaro nui atu kia koutou, ki tāmaki makaurau, e no o motu ana, no reira ngā manaakitanga kia koutou, tatu mai kia tātou katoa. So just mindful of everybody in tāmaki makaurau, so sending out our love to everybody. And also, before I get into things, just want to do a bit of a promotion. This is an awesome book called Waihiko. And Waihiko is a creation from Ariki Creative. I helped them out a little bit and just want to do a shout out because it's pretty cool to see this come to fruition. And on Te Kōkō Muka, you might have heard me say in the second, or I don't know when it was, but I talked about sometimes we've got to create new atua. And when you create new atua, you've got to make sure that they have legitimacy and connection back to our narratives. And Waihiko is the atua that we worked on pertaining to electricity. It'll be launched later on in the month and connecting with Ariki Creative to check it out. So once again, Waihiko, check her out. Kia ora tātou. Okay rā. So, kaupapa number 5 for Tangihanga, and kaupapa number 5 is specifically around the funeral day. And so there's a couple of things that we want to cover. Firstly, closing. So some people will close at midnight or the night before. Some will close pre-dawn, some will close around dawn, some will close at 7 a.m. and then others will close at just before the service. Each tribe will have their reasons, but the most important thing, kia rana, the most important thing is make sure that you ask, especially if you're a whānau pani, make sure you ask when the body will be closed, or the casket will be closed, so that you can prepare yourself. Because if you're not used to the casket being closed the night before, then it's your chance to get used to that and they can explain their why, or what time in the morning, or even what time before the service. I know for myself, I like it the night before and or earlier than anything else, simply because it gives the whānau time to get over that first shock before going into the next shock of the body leaving the marae. But each marae, each iwi will have their reasons, and it's important for you to ask. So that's closing. The rest of the funeral day, you have breakfast, and make sure you have a good breakfast because you'll be pretty buggered by this time, and you just need to keep your energy up because you're going to cry a river and it's important to make sure that you have some energy to sustain yourself. Another point on a funeral day is that the paipai need to be very clear on when to close. Some will just say, oh no, if there are manuhiri there, yeah, we just keep welcoming them in. I was taught you should never turn up on the last day. I te mea, our people would always say, and I've heard this all around the country, you turn up on the last day, you're turning up for a kai. And so I have occasionally turned up on the last day and I get really embarrassed by it because it's not actually the way you should do things. In addition, people who talk for a long time on the last day are just being rude because you've had your time to turn up and to lay your kōrero down, and you should be being considerate for the haukainga who are trying to get everything else ready to give that tūpāpaku the best send-off that they can have. And so, you know, if you're on the pai, just close your pai. If your service is at 11, either close it at 10 or 10:30. If it's a small ope, you can close it at 10:30. If it's a big ope, then you might just want to have one for the day. And the rest close. And people all be going, oh, I didn't get a pohiri, all of that. Well, you should have been there the day before. Quite simple. And you can't go, oh, well, I had work. Because we all have work, but you can't expect things when you're turning up on the last day. What I do, once I've closed the paipai off, is people can just come on, and then just before the service, I will do one more mihi to welcome everybody. And then I hand it over to whoever's doing the service. During the service, the big question, do you do a eulogy or you don't do a eulogy? Eulogy is a Pākehā thing, whereas our form of eulogy is done the night before at the Pōaka Mutunga, where we will talk and give the stories about the person the night before. And that's your chance to cry, that's your chance to laugh, to remember, all of those different things. And some iwi won't let the whānau pani speak at any time. Some iwi will let them speak on the last night. But it's different depending on where you're from. And I think it's important that as pani, as the bereaving family, you ask the question, are you allowed to speak or not? Because some of our people in our pai, they might come across as abrupt, but you have to also take into consideration they might still be learning. And so putting the pressure on them, you can get a number of responses, and sometimes it can be an abrupt response. And so you just got to be mindful that everybody's going through things, and especially now that many of our paipai have roving paipai around the region, because we just don't have enough speakers. So ask the questions right up front before you get there to know whether you're allowed to speak or not. I know in my own marae, we don't let our pani speak until after the burial. You have your service, they take them off, remembering feet first when you put them into the urupā. But if not, then you just got to work that out. But normally feet first. Then there's burials, cremations, etc. So if we start with burials, usually the grave diggers leave early because it takes a few hours to dig a hole, and you should always measure, and it's best to measure the lid, not the coffin, because the lid's slightly bigger, slightly longer, slightly wider. It's only a little bit bigger and wider, but it's still bigger, and so you always measure. You measure the lid, and try and do it discreetly. Grave diggers go, They do their thing. When you have enough numbers, and some marae end up using diggers because they don't have the numbers, and it's different wherever you go. But traditionally, the grave diggers would be tapu until they have covered the body. Then they would return back, have a wash, and then sit at the main table with the whānaupani, because they're given that last honour and last right. So you bring them in to do that. There's a question about why feet first, because you treat the body as if it's alive so that they are walking and not going backwards. So it's real simple stuff. But going back to the burial, so you take the body off the marae, take them to bury. Sometimes you walk the body all the way there if the rupa is right next to your marae. If it's a distance away, you might go in a car. And so you arrive there, you take the body to the hole. It should be a short service. If you're going to go on and on at the urupa, you should have done that over the last 3 days doing your karakia, and the service should be he tuku I te tūpāpaku kia nehu. You just send them your job is to put them to rest. You've done all your karakia, you've had all your chance to do your karakia. And so it should be a short karakia, but there's a conflict between religions and tikanga, where some religions will go on and on and on. There are some who will do their burials early in the morning, and they can go on at that time, but there's a reason for that. And I'll leave that for those maramatanga and hahi to explain that for themselves. But it should be a short service at the burial, and then, as I know it, there should only be one mihi, and that mihi is to the kai karakia and to say farewell to the tūpāpaku. These big long mihis at the urupa are simply because the paipai has allowed it over time, and also because people turn up on the last day and want to have a say, when actually ko oti, ko tukuna ke te wairua, ko tā koutou e tuku I te tinana. All you're doing is you're committing the tinana to papa. The wairua is gone, and so any chance to mihi, you should have done that at the marae. And when I say to people, ko tai ana ki te kōrero, I see people's body language get a bit put off. Well, you had your chance, and quite simple, really. And then you encourage everybody to go around, place their flower, their rau, their maimai, their parekawakawa, or whatever else, the dirt into the hole, mihi to the haukainga, and then you give a notice to make sure that everybody returns back to the marae together, rather than returning drips and drabs. And often, if the family aren't used to tikanga, some of them will want to go and do their oathing, but you've got to finish with the hakari to help lift the tapu, and to also say thank you to the haukainga that have been looking after you. There's a question about when is the wairua sent. You send the wairua usually on the last night or when you close, and you send it on its journey. And traditionally, everybody did the closings pre-dawn, but it's changed over time. And that was because you sent the wairua in the pō for it to find the stars, which is why we say koutou kohe tūrangitia, you that have become stars. And so you did it in the night so that they can go to the place to wait to become a star. And the new day was part of the process to bring the grieving family back out into the sun. So you go to the urupa, then you return back together. Some marae will do it differently. Some will just wait and you're allowed to just go back onto the marae. Some will call you onto the marae formally and then you wait, or some will call you straight into the warepuni to karakia, hiki tapu, and then also give a chance for the whānau pani to say thank you. Some will do that in the warepuni, some will do that in the warekai. Either way, it's your chance to go back together, wait for your hakari. Once you then get called for the hakari, you go down, have the kai, and then as the whānau pani, afterwards, as tempting as it is to go and talk to all your friends that have come to express their love, your job is to then go and do the dishes and serve your cooks. Serve your cooks who have been slaving over the stove and all of that for the last few days, and it's one way for you to give back to your cooks. And so you wait, you clean up, and then you do the next setting for the cooks, and you give back to them. If it's not a burial, then it's a cremation. And with the cremation, there's so much debate around cremations. And for me, it's simple. Traditionally, we only cremated in times of war to protect the bones so that, well, to get rid of everything so that the fighting tribe didn't get any of your bones and do bad things and desecrate your body. So it was originally only done during times of war. Yes, there are times where you will tauna, and tauna is to embalm through a hangi process. And I know people who still have the recipe to do that, and that's how you make a mokomokai, the preserved heads that have been in the bloody museums for a long time. However, it's become a very common practice for cremation today, and kei tēnā, kei tēnā. And I think what's important is that you just have to work through all of these things with the haukainga, with yourselves as a family. And it wasn't until I lived in the South Island and I heard a kaumātua from Tainui refer to the body being cremated, and he says, ka hoki atu koe ki ngā mai kuku, a tōku ia mahuika. And because I'd always struggled with cremation, but when I heard that, it gave me a Māori context to think about. Still not my cup of tea, but kei tēnā, kei tēnā. Had an interesting conversation last year about aquamation, which is a water cremation of sorts, where you go through a process and you get put into this chamber and this water takes off all of the flesh and just leaves the bones. I think the most important thing is whatever you do with the bones, with the remains, whether they be ashes, that liquid form and the bones, is you put them to a place to maintain the separation of tapu and noa. Some people are quite comfortable having them on their mantelpiece. Some just, it's a no-no. And I think people just need to be mindful of the separation between tapu and noa. And don't just sprinkle your ashes where people are going to go swimming, or where people go and gather food, or where it's sacred to the tribe, even if you're not from there and you just want to put them on their mountain. There are heaps of people who go to me, oh yeah, we did this on your mountain. Like, yeah, thanks. And because it's important that we respect each other and find ways to put the remains in places that are marked out rather than just anywhere, because you'll end up having a picnic or eating your cousin's ashes when you eat the fish that ate the ashes. Yum. Finally, on the funeral day, a lot of people today will leave the marae on the funeral day, but some will still sleep that night. And And it's important to sleep the night if you can, because that karakia that night is to help you as well. And it's also the time where the waira whānau will lift another layer of tapu off. Say if you're the in-law and you return the body of your loved one back to his or her land, it's the responsibility of that marae to lift the tapu off you so that you are then free to marry again because you've sent that person home. If you keep them on your land, you keep your partner on your land, you are telling your partner's family that you don't want to marry again. And it's only up to your family, your in-laws, to take that tapu off you. But also it's a beautiful thing to witness. So there's that. And then the next morning, it's just digging in to give the marae the big, massive clean over. Toilets, warepuni, warekai, everything, rubbish around the marae, around the car park, all of that, clear it up so that the marae is left clean for the next kaupapa. That's a big, long session tonight, but hopefully that's been helpful. And I think some key things, ask the questions on what the tikanga is, around closing, around speaking, the process around giving back. So make sure that you then feed the cooks afterwards to help clear. One final question I can see. Anything that's been placed on the photos, korowai, all of that, you leave those photos when you leave the marae to take the person, because a lot of people take the photo with them and then they want to take it into the dining room. No, you leave it with the haukainga. They will place it in the whare somewhere and we'll do karakia over it, either separate or once you return back. And then the car, the korowai, etc., somebody, one of the paipai or the ministers will do the karakia for that as well. And it's all pretty quick process. But yeah, katiake. That's enough, I think. Hope these are helpful and trying to cover tikanga from as many areas as possible, just so that you're mindful. When in doubt, ask questions. And once again, waihiko, check out Ariki Creative. Here's our atua for electricity. Katiake, e mi'i kawana, Che Wilson here from Te Pai Pai Waho, e mi'i atu ana ki koutou, kia tātou katoa I roto I tēnei pō. E rongo o kaire ake, ki runga ai, turuturu au I te wakamaua kia tīna, aumia ui e tāi ki e. Kia ora tātou.